Hello, my name is Michelle Palmer, and I will be your trainer for this workshop. Um, the title of this workshop is Transitions, um, helping your adolescent successfully transition from high school to college. All right, let's see if I can share my screen. And while I'm doing that, a little bit about me. I am a clinical social worker, currently the executive director of the WENT Center for Loss and Healing. We are a nonprofit mental health agency in Washington, D.C., specializing in grief, loss, trauma, and the intersection actually of grief and trauma. I've been here for 9 years, and I've been a clinical social worker, I don't know, 20. I know I look very young. Okie dokie. Able to do that. You guys can all see that okay. Here we go. All right. I use this image a lot. If you've done any trainings with me, you will likely have seen this image before, because as I said, I use it a lot. It is, I always think, such a beautiful illustration, depiction, whatever you want to call it, of a couple of things. Adolescence, generally, life, generally, life with COVID, generally, and certainly the transition from high school to college. When I was asked if I wanted to do this training, I absolutely jumped at the opportunity because my transition from high school to college was not, unfortunately, a smooth transition. And the spring semester of my sophomore year, I was asked to leave college and not come back. And it was, those 2 years were an incredibly difficult time. Getting kicked out of school was a particularly difficult and frankly shameful experience. And so, now that I've got, I don't know, 25, 30 years of hindsight, I was so excited to be able to use my experience and some research to help parents support their young person in transitioning from high school to college. So, yeah. All right. We're going to start with preparing. I will be shocked if all of you who have kids who are going to college and who will be living either on campus or off campus, but not under your roof, I'll be shocked if you don't already have some sort of a list going. Probably a Bed Bath & Beyond and Target list. And it would be great if culturally we were as thorough in preparing our young people with the skills that they will need to be successful and not just the things that they will need to be successful. We focus a lot on I'm sure that Bed Bath & Beyond list is long and expensive. But there are actually some things, especially that you can and should start doing conversations that you should start having now with your young person as they prepare to leave in August. And hopefully things will be somewhat back to normal and they will be leaving in August. All right. So let's talk a little bit about communication. Um, within the context of a family, and even within the context of a friend group, communication is oftentimes just sort of taken for granted. Within our family, um, as young people and as we mature in age, we're actually sort of taught how to communicate, at least with our siblings and our parents. Um, and in very short order, we, have a family shorthand, if you will. It's you never think like, at least I never do, like, okay, if I need something from my sister and I use very direct language and a tone of voice, she might not give that to me. Like, I just don't think like that. I need something from my sister. I'm going to ask her in the way that my family communicates, and I'm not going to give it second thought. Same with my friend group. But communication styles are tricky. Do you know what your communication style is? Do you know what your kids' communication style is? Do they know what their communication style is? And I'm not talking like you can Google different communication styles and find out. Certainly you can do that. But it's really more an analysis of the way that I provide information as well as the way I receive information. And really helping your young person be clear on that is probably one of the most valuable tools you'll be able to give them as they get ready to sort of leave that nest. So, for example, um, I'm an incredibly direct communicator. There is virtually zero times when people don't know what I'm thinking or feeling, and I go straight to it. Um, I was raised in North Jersey, so I think part of it is actually truly probably regional. But I also come from a family of people who sort of have two communication styles. One is super direct, the other is completely avoidant. Um, and so helping your young person sort of know sort of how what is their communication style in terms of when they need something, when they're talking to friends, to family. Are they are the strategies the same or different? Um, and then also helping them understand, doing a little bit of introspection on how do they receive information. Um, so for me, um, even if it's difficult information for me to hear, I'd rather you just say it. Don't put in a bunch of fluffy words. Um, don't, you know, don't dance around. Just say it. But that is certainly not everybody's style of receiving information. And so helping your young person think about how, what are the ways in which I want to receive, and I'm going to talk specifically difficult information. Um, because why this is important is your young person is going to be navigating many situations that they probably, and it's interpersonal situations that they probably haven't had to navigate, or at least with the intensity that they will. And so helping them have these conversations so they can then have the conversations with their roommate, with their suite mates, whatever the case may be, so that the breakdown, because this is, communication is exactly where relationships break down. Um, and so trying to get ahead of that so that there's a strategy around, all right, like if I need to ask you something that I'm worried you're not going to like, what is the best way for me to do that? Is there a time of day? Like, are you a morning person or are you a night person? Um, do you want me to just directly ask, or are you a person who wants me to also give examples of why I'm asking? Things like that. Because when those conversations happen, and they will, living with somebody new is all about communication, negotiation. Um, we want to be able to maintain that sort of that connection with roommates, with suite mates, with whomever. So communication. Um, so when thinking about communication, um, helping your young person practice using I statements instead of you statements. You statements can and often do sound like, and often are, statements of blame rather than statements that are interested in problem solving. And so using I statements like, um, when you come home at 2 o'clock in the morning with your boyfriend and wake me up, I feel frustrated and worried because I know I have to get up in the morning. Um, can we have a conversation about sort of how do we strategize about that? The next is really knowing how to get their needs met. There's a difference between being a good self advocate and being rigid and stubborn. Um, there is going to have to be compromise, um, and um, and your young person, if they are kind of used to getting their own way, um, and sort of have all or nothing thinking as adolescents do, this is going to be hard. This is going to be an adjustment. And like, while I am not a good or not a big fan of role play, I think in sort of practicing these kinds of conversations and role playing potentially difficult, either experiences or exchanges, um, I think will help to your young person up to experience success. Um, you also want to have those hard conversations around drugs, drug use, alcohol use, sex, and not just condoms, around consent. Um, and I'm going to talk actually more about that in a minute. Um, but really around both the dangers of all of the dangers that can come about from alcohol, drugs, and sex, and sometimes all three together. Um, but also sort of that conversation around, why are you drinking? Why are you doing drugs? Why are you having sex? Are these things you are doing to fit in? you are doing to escape, or you're doing because you're growing up and you want to try new things. And then I think the other sort of important one is really helping them know when to ask for help. And again, that's really a conversation, sort of, and it's one I wish that my mom had had with me, which is around how will I, your dad, another trusted adult know when things are not going well. Um, I will say that before I failed out of college, um, there were lots of warning signs around my behavior that my mom knew about and kind of just shrugged it off as uh, typical college behavior, when in fact it was typical college behavior, yes. The reason for me engaging in that typical college behavior was not typical college. I was doing it because I was deeply mourning a very traumatic loss of a person who was very close to me 4 months before I went to college. He was supposed to come to college with me. And so most of my classmates were not, they were not engaging in, sex, drugs, and rock and roll um, because they were trying to bury a painful bereavement experience. They were doing it because they were college kids. They were on their own for the first time, and they were figuring out where their boundaries were. That is very, very different from um, I am engaging in all of this behavior to numb out and to make this pain or try unsuccessfully to make this pain that I'm in more manageable. All right. I'm a big fan of managing expectations. And I believe strongly that the way that we manage expectations is that we anticipate them and we have conversations long before events happen. And so thinking about, like, how frequently does your kid want you to contact them? Daily check-ins, a couple times a day check-ins, once a week. Um, I'm so glad to get away from you. Don't ever call me again. I'm just kidding. And the same with you. How frequently would you like them to contact you? And if those frequencies don't jive, this is your first opportunity to help practice role play negotiation. And what kind of communication are you going to have? Text, phone, FaceTime, Zoom. Um, Again, so that eh, to the extent possible, you and your young person are on the same page. Um, what kind, when they call, do they just want to catch you up on things? Are they looking for a sympathetic ear? Or do they actually want your help in problem solving or your advice? The best way to know that is to simply ask them directly. I just did a training earlier and I was talking about, it is so parents, but I think mostly adults, our inclination is to, when a young person comes to us with a problem, our inclination is to give them the solution or to fix it for them. Um, and if you have ever had a bad day, let's say you've had a bad day at work, you come home, you tell your partner, spouse, significant other about your bad day at work, and they immediately go into fix mode and problem solving mode. And you immediately get furious because all you wanted and needed was for them to listen. And so asking your young person, okay, am I hearing this right? And what of this would you like me to do? Just compassionate ear, problem solver, validator, what? Um, I think the other piece that I want to just talk about here is procrastination and attendance. It is because you don't have to go to class and nobody is going to make you go to class, it becomes quite easy um, to not go to class. Um, and I can speak from personal experience that for me, what happened was I went to somewhat of a small school. Um, and, after I'd missed like 4 classes in a row, I was like, well, now I can't go back because the professor's going to have noticed that I haven't come to class in 2 weeks. I'm going to be super far behind. Um, and so it just becomes like this snowball where, the decision to skip a class and then the next week and then the week after that becomes very problematic. My very favorite uncle uh, says with some frequency um, that 95% of life is just showing up. And uh, when I went back to college, it was so resonant with me, the truth of that. 95% is just showing up. And so, really checking in with your young person about their attendance. It's the easiest place for young people to lose their way. All right. So obviously, we hope that nothing ever, ever, ever goes wrong. And it does. And so we want to, as difficult as this is, it's important to think about, consider, and plan for some kind of worst case scenarios. So the first thing to do is know your kids' school resources as well as the resources in the surrounding community. Freshman year is not an uncommon time to start seeing symptoms of major mental illness. That is because A, it's the age and sort of brain chemistry. B, it is lack of sleep, and so our brains become sort of more vulnerable, I think is probably the word I want to use. And third is stress. And so if you've got serious mental illness in your family, have that conversation explicitly with your young person. Know the symptoms of whatever serious mental illness that runs in your family is. Is it schizophrenia? Is it bipolar disorder? Is it generalized anxiety? Is it major depressive disorder? But know those symptoms so that you can have an eye out for them. You know, should, God forbid, something happen. The other thing, and there are suicide is a huge problem on college campuses and universities. Kids' regular support system is no longer available to them. The friends that they've grown up with are in other schools, making new friends. Perhaps their therapists that they had at home, they had to say goodbye to, and there's not been a replacement for that kind of support. Um, there are a lot of reasons why young people die by suicide frequently. Their freshman and sophomore years of college. The other thing to know is that, you know, of all of the parts of our brain, the last part to fully develop, fully, is our prefrontal cortex. And that is the part of the brain that is associated with understanding long-term consequences. It's why college kids do such stupid things. It's why I did such stupid things. It's probably why you did such stupid things as a college student. Um, and lots of that is funny, and they make for funny stories. Um, but it's not so funny when that sort of applies to um, I'm thinking about ending my life, and my brain actually isn't prepared to understand the implications of that. What I need is for the pain that I'm in to end. Um, so really having conversations very explicitly with your young person, um, because it may not be their life they save, it may be somebody else's. And then the second thing I want to talk about, which no parent ever wants to talk about, is sexual assault on college campuses. Um, for business reasons, colleges and universities often underreport or downplay the instances of sexual assault on their campus. And so, what data they are putting out to the masses is almost always significantly less than what's actually happening. And those are the sexual assaults that got reported. And then think about the number of sexual assaults that go unreported. Sexual assault on college campuses is an enormous, enormous problem. And so, really having a conversation with it does not matter the gender, sexual orientation of your young person. Lots of conversation around um, consent, explicit consent. What does explicit consent mean? Um, for you as a parent, understanding how the college and university handles sexual assault complaints on campus. It is not uncommon, unfortunately, for a student to report a sexual assault by another student. And while the university is investigating the allegation, um, the two are still having to live in the dorm together. The two are still having to negotiate classes together. And so you really want to know what is the college and university's policy and practice around issues of sexual assault. You also want to know whether or not external law enforcement gets involved. And how does that happen? And how are those decisions made? You also want to know where are the resources? If my child wants/needs a sexual assault kit, often called a rape kit, where can they access that and how will they get there? So for instance, in Washington, D.C., if you are a victim of sexual assault and you want or need a medical forensic exam and intervention, the District of Columbia will pay for an Uber to come and get you and transport you to the single hospital in Washington, D.C. currently that collects the medical forensic evidence. But knowing that, making sure your child knows that is very, very important. And then the last thing that I will say about understanding sort of the protocol and policies of sexual assault is, will you be notified? Um, and under what circumstances will you be notified? Most kids who go to college go when they are 18 or over and are therefore considered adults. But if you've got a young person who is 17 because they started school late, or because they skipped a grade or whatever reason, um, they are actually not considered adults. And how does the school manage that? We had an incident here in DC a couple years ago where a 17-year-old was sexually assaulted her first week at one of the universities here in Washington, D.C. Um, the young lady was from Ohio. And the only reason that's relevant is it's kind of a far distance from DC. She absolutely did not want her parents notified of the assaults. The university did not respect this young woman's wishes and notified her parents, and she dropped out of school the following week. So really, these situations happen, and they have very real and significant consequences. So I always believe that information um, is incredibly important and helpful, sort of as you think about building your armor and your kids' armor, to help keep them as safe as possible. So that's me and my friend Marla on the day that my mom and Marla dropped me off at college. Um, I look pretty happy in this picture, which is striking to me because I was not at all happy. I was terrified. I was profoundly sad that my cousin wasn't there doing this with me, that it was my friend Marla. Um, I was, um, I think, already on some level thinking I was not going to be able to do this, whatever this is. What I will also say, which I think is interesting, is if you've got a young person who has had, within the last year or two, a pretty significant grief or trauma, um, have conversations with them about how that might come back as they make this major transition. One of the, my mom and I are incredibly close. We were incredibly close back then. And I don't recall ever having a conversation about the fact that, she was packing me up and sending me 4.5 hours away, um, without my cousin, who sort of was my person. And so I got there, and it it was immediately overwhelming. And I wish that my mom and I had talked, had problem solved. I wish I had anticipated some of the stumbling blocks, because they were easy to anticipate. Um, but we didn't do any of that. And so essentially, we did not tee me up to be successful. Whatever that is, my first time around. My second time around, we surely did, but that's a talk for another day. All right, so letting go without letting go. So this is going to be your balance. This is where you will stumble probably. This is art, not science. This is the dance that you and your young person are going to have to do. And it's going to be scary and it's going to be hard. And it's important to remember that with every decision you let them make, with every decision you help them make, with every decision you don't make for them, you are helping them mature into adults. And so it is about, how do I make sure that I stay connected to my young person while also nurturing this independence that they are going to need moving forward. All right, signs of stress. I'm going to play just a small piece of this. It's from a television show, Grownish. It is a spinoff from a show, Blackish. What I like about this clip is the articulation of the many things that this particular college kid, but it's universally the many things college kids struggle with and worry about, particularly new, like sort of the first month or two as they are finding their way. So, as I said, I love that particular scene from Grownish. What I would encourage you to do is watch it a couple of times and sort of listen to Zoe, hear what she is talking about in terms of what college kids are worried about, because what she talks about are the big worries that they may never articulate to you unless you leave space and curiosity for them to explore it. And to be worried that you're going to become your parents when you're the parent is hard, maybe hard to hear. And it's very natural. None of us, I'm sure, wanted to be exactly like our parents, and I trust that neither of my parents really wanted me to be, they wanted something else for me. And so creating space and time and an environment that invites sort of critical curiosity around stuff like that, I think is super, super important. All right. Now, let's see if we can stop doing that. And close it out. All right. So while certainly the stressors are going to be different for each one of your young people, there actually are some common college stressors. Worry about your grades. My understanding is that you guys are STEM parents and teachers and staff, and I'm imagining that your young people are fairly high performing, at least academically, and they may, for the first time ever, find themselves either struggling academically or having to study in a way they've never had to before. Or, if they're anything like my niece, she didn't even have any study skills because she didn't need to study until college. And so she was like, she didn't even know how to even go about doing that. And so, again, before your young person is in trouble academically, have conversations around how will I know? When will you tell me? How can I support? Um, you know, I'm a fairly honest person, and I lied to my parents' face um, for 3 semesters. And they never checked on me. For 3 semesters, I told them that I wasn't getting my report card because I owed library books. And they just took my word for it and just kind of let it drop. And the reality is that they weren't getting my report cards because there was no way I was giving them report cards with a GPA of 1.7. Or actually, my favorite, which was my final year, the fourth semester of college, a 0.17. And if any of you are wondering how that happens, it is failing every single class and getting a D- in your lab class. So yeah, there was no way I was giving my parents any of those report cards. And so I just lied and lied and lied and would have lied more had my mom not actually found my report cards hidden in my dresser. Other stressors are making new friends. For a lot of kids, they're shy. Making friends is hard anyway, or they perhaps have like a sexual orientation that may not be considered mainstream, or they're gender fluid or non-binary, and um, they're worried they're going to struggle to make friends, or for some kids, they haven't had to make new friends since elementary school. And so they don't even know how to do it. They're super out of practice. So that's also fairly common. I think the rest of these are fairly self-explanatory. All right. How these issues manifest themselves in behaviors. And I'm giving you this slide because these may be some of the questions to ask to try and get to whether or not there's a problem with your kid. So, because if you ask your kid, is there a problem? Lots and lots and lots of kids are going to say no, everything's fine, when in fact, everything is not fine. So ask about changes in sleep patterns. And yes, there will be changes in sleep patterns. No, there isn't a bedtime. Parents aren't going to bed and turning out the lights at 10. You know, if they're in a suite, there's different people coming in at all hours. So yes, their sleep patterns may change. Are they disrupted, and are they disrupted over time? Same with changing in eating patterns. Eating disorders, super common in both high school and college, in both men and women, although men's eating disorders are not talked about as frequently. Um, the freshman 15, we all laugh. The freshman 15 is a very real thing. Um, it is about kids trying to figure out um, how to manage all of their nutrition and every single meal in a way most have never had to do. It's also a time where there's, late night eating is happening. They eat junk food more than they probably would because they're doing their own grocery shopping. Um, the converse also happens where and this is talked about less frequently, but where there's significant weight loss. That is often associated with kids who either go to school with somewhat of a generalized anxiety disorder or develop it while they are there. So really keep an eye on sort of how your kid looks. Um, what is their weight? Certainly don't ask. But do they look different? And if they do, don't be afraid to bring it up. I mean, don't be like, I noticed you look pretty fat. Um, but, oh, I noticed you've gained a couple pounds. Are you okay? Are you okay with it? Do you need, do you want some new pants? Whatever it is. Or I noticed that you're getting thin. Because the getting thin is actually sort of the the bigger, the more immediate. They're both potentially huge problems. But the potential anorexia, bulimia, has uh, health outcomes and crises that happen much faster than carrying an extra 15, 20 pounds. Um, is your young person more short-tempered? Um, did they go from being a pretty easygoing kid to a pretty high-strung kid? Did they go from being a high-strung kid to a super high-strung kid? Um, are they having trouble organizing themselves? So what I mean by that is, you know, are they having trouble managing their class schedules? Are they having trouble managing their thought processes? Are they having trouble getting their homework done? Um, and then the last one I want to talk about it, because we're going to talk about it in a minute, is isolating themselves. Are they just not socializing at all? Are they not leaving their dorm room other than to go to class? Um, that can be a sort of a pretty significant red flag that if you notice it, you want to have a conversation about it. All right. So I think most of us think we're pretty good listeners. I mean, how hard is it? We have ears and we are able to hear. And if we're not able to hear, we're able to read lips. But hearing and listening are very, very, very different. And so really thinking about um, being fully present, listening to understand, not respond, um, checking in. I think I hear you saying blah. Is that right? Because you also don't want to assume that the way that you're hearing the information and your brain is interpreting it is actually accurate with what your kid is trying to say and trying to tell you. Um, and really, silence in conversation is underrated. Silence is okay. Silence is oftentimes us trying to figure out the words we want to use, or trying to let the information that's just been given to us kind of get integrated. And so while it is, I think, a very common um, desire, which is to fill silence with words and noise and all other sorts of things, um, remember that actually try and not do that. Remember that silence can actually be helpful. It can be helpful for you, it can be helpful for your kid. I'm not going to talk a ton about this, but increasing tolerance, really, this goes back to that black and white thinking that happens in adolescence and early adulthood. Um, and that part is just part of development, adolescent development. But what I do um, think that parents and caregivers and teachers can help with is this labeling of good versus bad feelings. Um, there are no good versus bad feelings. There's comfortable feelings and there's uncomfortable feelings. And typically, our comfortable feelings are those feelings that are associated with certainty and sort of they're good. And those uncomfortable feelings are often associated with ambiguity and they're bad. Ambiguity in and of itself is neither good nor bad. Ambiguity is just that, it's ambiguity. And in reality, much of life is ambiguous. You know, we certainly can, and as human beings, decide we're going to live in a polarized way. But the reality is, if you've not made that decision to live in a polarized way, and I hope none of us have, what that means is that we are living and existing in a world of gray where some things are unknown, some things are uncertain, and that is okay. That is part of life, and helping your young person gain a level of comfort with that um, is a really good thing. There's going to be a lot of ambiguity at the beginning of college. You know, they're not going to know whether or not they like or dislike their roommate immediately, or their classes, or a professor, or living away from home, or the dining hall food. You know, all of this is, you know, I don't know. And it's okay. That's okay not to know. And let's just be open and let's stay curious. And let's also understand that we get to change our mind. And then we may change it again and again and again. And that is life. That is growing up. That is uh, getting to know ourselves better. These are just some strategies. I would actually hand these to your young person. Um, and if you don't already practice these, I would strongly suggest you do this, because it is also stressful having your kids leave your house where you're not seeing them every single day. You're not sharing space with them every single day. They're not, you know, a 15-minute car ride away. So also, these are good, not just for teenagers, but also for grown-ups. I will also say that in so doing, in using these and practicing them, you were modeling for your kids sort of safe and healthy strategies for managing stress, because stress happens and stress is not good or bad. Um, it is simply pressure. Um, and pressure can be good. Pressure creates diamonds. But if we don't have a release valve for that pressure, that can become problematic. And that kind of gets back to those behaviors that I talked about. Like, if I don't have that release, is that going to show up in changes in my sleeping? Is that going to increase my anxiety and I'm going to be testy with you, with my roommate, etc.? And so, again, this is not an exhaustive list, but I think a good one, and I think one that everybody really should look at and pick a few to help sort of manage our stress. All right, practicing compassion. Um, this kind of gets back to you cannot fix it. Um, but you can show compassion when you can't fix it and things are hard. The reality is, I don't know anybody who went through college and didn't have a difficult experience, moment, period of time. Um, and, as human beings, what sort of helps ground us, particularly in those difficult moments or periods of time, what helps ground us is knowing that we are cared about and that we are cared for. And that's where compassion shows up. Another picture of me. So this is a 70s party at college. This was my second time around. And so, as I said, I got kicked out of college my fourth semester, so the last semester of my sophomore year. And my mom was furious, as you might imagine. And part of sort of her figuring out how to move forward with this, she said, "You will go back to college." And I was like, "Of course I'm going to go back to college. I'm going to go to like community college. It's going to be totally fine." And her question was, "Where are you going to live when you're going to community college?" And I was like, "What?" She's like, "You're not living here." And she said, "If you want to live here, you're going to get yourself back into the college that kicked you out." Which I like, when she said it, I was like, "You've lost your mind. You don't really know what expulsion means." Um, I will tell you that to date, it's probably the best thing my very permissive mother ever did, which was had an incredibly difficult accountability for me that involved humility, me having to be humble, me having to ask for help, me having to be transparent about all that was happening for me. And so my second time at my college, Castleton State University in Vermont, I got there really ready to just kind of pick up where I left off. I took a year off. The academic dean said, "You cannot come back immediately. I think you're not ready. Take a year off. If you still want to, come back. We'll have a conversation." That's what happened. I come back kind of ready to pick my life up again. And all of my friends, literally all of my friends had moved on. They had either graduated or were in their senior year. Where I was actually credit wise a freshman again because I hadn't earned any credits. And so I got there and found myself all alone. Um, and that and I got really withdrawn. I lost a lot of weight. I was not actively suicidal, but there were many, many times that I thought, I'm not sure I want to be alive. Um, and this perky little blonde, Lori Thompson, there's a knock on my apartment door one Saturday, which is strange. Nobody ever came. They open the door, and there's this perky little blonde. And she says, "Hi, I'm Lori. I see you at the library all the time, and you're always by yourself, and you always look so sad. And I was wondering, I go for a walk every day, and I just was wondering if you might want to join me for my walk." And, you know, it was incredibly thoughtful and generous and brave of Lori to reach out and to a stranger and ask if I wanted to go for a walk. Um, and initially, I wanted to say no. Um, I don't need, like in my head, I'm thinking, I don't need your charity. No. Um, but the reality was, I didn't have any friends and I was super lonely. And so I said yes. Um, and I think that's the super important piece of it. It's kind of like help your kid be Lori and help your kid be me. Help your kid be kind and generous and giving and notice if and when people are in distress, and help your kid be humble and open and courageous, that when somebody reaches, you know, throws a life vest at them, have tell them, be brave and take it. Um, so in a nutshell, teach your kids to be me and Lori. And me and Lori are still friends these 32 years later. She's a doctor now, lives in California. All right. I want to talk about suicide. I know nobody wants to hear about it. But these statistics, I think, are startling and very, very important. So please don't think that it's not going to be my kid, because unfortunately, um, every single year it's somebody's kid, actually kids. And so really thinking about, how do you have that conversation about suicide? How do you help your young people understand that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem? And that, you know, in life, good times don't last forever, but neither do bad. And so, what is it that they need to get through the bad and maybe to get through the very, very, very bad? Signs and symptoms. I'm not going to go through these. The one I don't even, is it on here? It actually may not even be, I'm not seeing it straight away. The other sign and symptom is oftentimes people will talk about a person who actually did kill themselves, that there was a time period right before the suicide where the person seemed better. They seemed happier. Um, so oftentimes, you've got parents who have a kid struggling mightily, mightily, mightily for a very long time. And oh my God, they're starting to seem better. And in fact, do seem better and actually seem happy. Um, Part of the reason that that happens is because they've already made the decision to kill themselves. And it's that decision that is so difficult for people. And once they've made it, they feel a deep sense of relief. And so don't assume that because your kid is feeling better, and if is particularly if they've struggled, and all of a sudden they seem better, I would be having some very, very frank conversations around suicide and their thinking about suicide. And if you are worried that your young person is in danger of dying by suicide, do every single thing you need to do to keep them alive, no matter how mad they get. And that might include having them hospitalized. And again, no matter what, no matter how mad they get, the end result is you want your kid to be alive. So these are just some resources, and that is all. Thanks for listening, and congratulations on getting your kids to college. Take good care.